ASM just added 2 new synths to the Hydra family, the Portable Explorer and the 6-octave Deluxe. They are based on the same virtual analog FM and wavetable synth engines like the previous Hydras, along with multiple wave-shaping mutators and effects. In this video, I'll take a look at the differences between all 4 synths in the family, what's new in the firmware since they were first released, and finally pros and cons and how they compare to other competing synths. Before I start, a quick disclosure: ASM sent these over for review, but as always they have no say over the content of this video. This channel is funded by viewers who subscribe to my content and book updates on Patreon, YouTube Premium and ads, and price check affiliate links in the description, which help the channel regardless of the product you choose to buy. Okay, let's get going. 2 years ago, I made a comprehensive review and tutorial about the original Hydrasynth keys and the desktop, and aside from a few complaints I had, which were addressed in firmware updates, the reviews have aged quite well. So if you want an in-depth look at every single aspect of the Hydrasynth engine, I highly recommend watching that. This video will pick up where that one left off and start by taking a look at what's new in these 2 synths. Hydrasynth Explorer and Deluxe are based on the same exact synth engine as the old keys and desktop. Explorer is designed to be even cheaper than the desktop with fewer controls, but with a 3-octave mini key keyboard with polyphonic aftertouch. Just so we're on the same page, polyphonic aftertouch or polytouch is where every key you press can detect pressure independently, as opposed to typical synth keyboards which either have just velocity detection or channel aftertouch, which means one pressure value for all the keys regardless of which you press. Hydrasynth Deluxe has the same patch programming layout as the 4-octave Hydrasynth and the desktop, but has 16 voices instead of 8 like all the other Hydras, and is bitimbral, meaning you can create splits or layers with completely different sounds, 8 voices each. I don't have the 4-octave Hydra in the frame, but if you imagine the Deluxe without 2 octaves on the right and without the bitimbral section on the left, you get the original 8-voice Hydrasynth, sort of about this big. In terms of I/O, the 6-octave Deluxe is also identical to the 4-octave Hydra, except that it has 2 additional stereo outputs if you want to process the 2 parts or timbres separately. So let's focus a bit on Explorer and take a look at the trade-offs between it and the other Hydras. Pros for Explorer are portability. It's smaller and weighs less than the keyboard Hydras, around 3.5 kilos or 8 pounds, more or less like the desktop compared to 22 pounds or 10 kilos for the 4-octave keyboard and 13 kilos or 28 pounds for the Deluxe. Explorer is also the only one of the 4 that can be battery powered. It does, however, require 8 AA batteries, so unless you have an issue with the planet, prepare to get rechargeable ones. It also has the same intuitive module selection interface. The buttons all over the interface are rubber instead of the hard plastic ones on all the other Hydras, but personally I actually slightly prefer these, not that there's a meaningful difference. More importantly, even though it has the same exact 8-voice engine as the desktop or the original keys version, it's also the least expensive of the 4, $600 compared to $800 for the desktop, $1,300 for the 4-octave, and $1,800 for the 6-octave Deluxe. Even though Explorer has a plastic enclosure, it feels very robust and sits on a metal bottom plate. Overall, the build feels super solid and I have no issue with it, the knobs, or anything else here at all. So those are pros for Explorer compared to the other Hydras. Let's take a look at what we give up to get this portability and price. The first disadvantage is mini keys compared to full-size keys, unless you prefer mini keys, of course. Now, this keyboard does have polyphonic aftertouch, just like the pads on the desktop and the full-size keys on the Hydras. Travel distance is rather short for the aftertouch, and I found that the default settings were too sensitive, but once I changed it from the default to hard or very hard, it worked surprisingly well. If you're familiar with the Arturia keystep, The mini keys here feel very similar except for the polyphonic aftertouch that these have as opposed to channel aftertouch on the key step. A few other things have been either removed or shrunken down. The mod and pitch bend controls are touch strips, as opposed to physical wheels, or none at all, by the way, on the desktop. There's no ribbon controller, like on Deluxe or Keys, neither on the desktop nor on Explorer. And like the desktop, Explorer has only 4 arpeggio knobs as opposed to 8 on the Keys, and 3 filter control knobs instead of 5 knobs on the Keys versions of Hydrasynth. In both cases, by the way, all the parameters represented on these extra knobs can be accessed through the menus. Analog I/O has also been slimmed down. There are no CV mod inputs on Explorer, and the CV outputs have been moved to the back. The reason these inputs might be important to you, even if you don't care much for Eurorack, is that the mod input on all the Hydras except the Explorer, which doesn't have them, can be used as an audio input to be fed into the filter and effects through the ring mod module in the mixer, or if you're into feedback craziness, you can feedback the headphone output as an FM or ring mod source on, again, all the Hydras except the Explorer, which doesn't have these 2 inputs. All that said, one of the most important differences, in my opinion, between Explorer and the 3 other Hydras is that you can only see and edit 4 parameters at a time, as opposed to 8 parameters with a bigger screen on all the other Hydras. The reason this is important, just in case you didn't see my original video, which you totally should, Hydrasynth isn't a knob per function synth, which is understandable since it has so many parameters you can control. Rather, you choose a module using any one of the orange keys, and then you edit the parameters of that module. So on Explorer, you can only see 4 parameters at a time, and you need to page up and down in case there are additional pages. Whereas on all the other Hydrasynths, you see 8 parameters at a time. Sometimes you don't need to page at all. For example, in this case, so the mutants or the oscillators. And if you do need to page up and down, this little arrow lights up, and you can pretty much see all the parameters on 2 pages, as opposed to here. Let's say you go into the filter. Again, this arrow lights up, but you have 3 pages in this case of parameters. Now, does this difference matter a lot? It depends on how you plan to use this synth. If you think you'll mostly be using the factory presets, which is not that bad considering there are 500 of them, it doesn't really matter. You'll mostly be using the macros in the preset. Each preset has 8 macros, so you will need to page up and down between 2 pages of 4 macros. But it's not that bad if you're only using macros. However, if you do think you'll be getting into intensive sound design, it's much more pleasurable to see 8 parameters at a time rather than 4. Not that it's impossible to create presets seeing only 4 parameters at a time, and if this was the only option across the Hydra line, I might not even have complained about it. But once you're used to seeing 8 parameters at a time, it feels pretty cramped to go back down to 4. Further, in terms of what you give up for a shrunken and less expensive Explorer, is that it only has MIDI in and out, whereas Deluxe and the others also have a MIDI through. Explorer only has a sustain pedal jack, whereas Deluxe adds an expression pedal to that. And like I mentioned, Deluxe is the only synth in the entire line that has 2 pairs of stereo outputs, 1 for each timbre. Another minor difference is that these 2 screens aren't close to each other on Explorer compared to the others, where they sit in one line. You don't need to use all screens at once often, but when you do, it's more convenient this way. But I guess like the 4 parameters, it's something you get used to. One more thing you're giving up with Explorer is that there are no headphone jacks in the front. There's only 1 1/4-inch headphone jack in the back, in the middle, which isn't such a convenient location, as opposed to both sizes here up front along with level control. So those are the pros and cons of Explorer compared to the family. Let's zoom in a little bit onto Hydrasynth Deluxe. So the fact that it's bitimbral doesn't just mean you can play splits, but you can also layer sounds. Now, it's not that a single timbre on a regular Hydrasynth is a slouch, but there's something about 2 Hydrasynths layered that just sounds bigger. The 2 extra octaves obviously come in handy whether you're playing a single timbre or risking a copyright strike. But the ribbon, like the original Hydrasynth keys, only spans 4 octaves. The controls are still bunched up across 4 octaves like the original Hydrasynth keyboard, which leaves this space to prop up another controller, synth, computer, or succulent if you so like, and it comes with a little shelf extender covered by a non-slip material that you can attach to the back of the synth. This section is also new, like I mentioned earlier. If you hit single, you get 16 voices of the same patch. And if you hit multi, you can load up 2 presets, like you can see here. This is the upper preset and the lower preset. You control the presets using these buttons. So hit lower, the buttons turn blue and you're editing the lower preset. Hit upper and they turn yellow and you're editing the upper preset. And if you hit both, then you're editing both. When you're controlling both, these little arrows on the macro page tell you which of the presets you're controlling, upper, lower, or sometimes both. And deciding whether to layer the presets or key split is very easy. So this is a key split, but you could easily enter dual mode and then either have a hard split or a crossfade, which you can control very easily. There's also a handy balance knob to control the balance between the 2 parts. One more perk for Deluxe, all the Hydra models have 5 banks of 128 presets. This has 8 banks of 128 presets for the single presets, and then another 5 banks of 128 presets for the multi-presets, which stores 2 patches or 2 presets each. By the way, if you want to see a detailed comparison between the desktop Hydra and the keyboard version, I'll refer you again to my original video linked below. I'm trying not to repeat anything said there here. Now there's one more way in which the new Hydras are different from the old ones, and that's key off velocity. Now I asked ASM, this is apparently a hardware thing, so you're not going to see key off velocity in the original Hydrasynth keys, only in Deluxe and Explorer. I put together this simple preset. Key off is represented in the mod matrix as a mod source, velocity off, and it's pretty simple. So here I've just got it connected to the filter. If I leave the key quickly, the filter will jump up. If I leave it slowly, the jump will be less prominent. So you basically get back a value in the mod matrix that you can send to any destination, but you can't, at least not in the current firmware, send a key off event to trigger one of the envelopes, unfortunately. So that's how the 2 new Hydras compared to the 2 older Hydras in the product line. Before I talk about pros and cons of the Hydras compared to other synths, which I got a lot of questions about, I'll touch on a few interesting firmware updates that came out since my original video, in particular the ones that addressed some of the issues that I had mentioned in that video. I won't demo all of these because they're extremely well explained on ASM's YouTube channel, but for the record, the latest firmware version 1.5 added new filter models for both filters. There's a warm mode, which is like an overall EQ curve, which reduces the highs and increases the lows. MPE support was added, a new mutant called phase difference, which inverts the oscillator and phase shifts it was added. There's new support for microtonal scales, new noise types, and a new distortion master effect. But I do want to talk about 2 things that I think are important that I mentioned as cons in my original video. The first thing that I love that they added was a mod connection shortcut. So previously, say if I wanted to connect LFO 5 to a parameter in oscillator 2, I'd have to hold LFO 5, press oscillator 2, and then choose which parameter I wanted to edit within oscillator 2. Now it's much easier. So let's say that I wanted to edit the pitch of oscillator 1, I just hold an LFO, say LFO 3, and then these light up, which hopefully you can see in the video. And yeah, don't tap the LFO twice, otherwise the parameter you're focusing on will disappear. Anyway, these 2 light up, and let's say that I wanted to modulate pitch, just hit that, and the mod connection is made. Then I can increase the mod depth and modulate, say, pitch in this case of oscillator 1. And the second important improvement is in how the LFOs can be used as sequencers. Now, no, Hydrasynth still doesn't have a proper polyphonic sequencer, but using the LFOs as monophonic key-triggered sequencers has become a lot easier now that you can put the LFO into semitone mode. So if I go into LFO 3 and put it into step mode, previously, you'd need to edit the numbers in a way that every 5 units represented a semitone, which was very hard to do. Now you just go and turn on semitone lock, and then you're editing semitones instead of a broad range of numerical values. Plus, you can also hold these keys and press a key on the keyboard to select a note. And this will be in tune as long as you set the mod depth to 128 in the mod matrix. And another important new thing that they added is that you can have the LFO re-trigger the envelope for every step, any one of the envelopes. So I can go into envelope 1 and choose another trigger source aside from note on. Let's go to LFO 3. And you can now hear the envelope trigger on every note, which is very useful. So if you've seen my Modwave review, this kind of turns the LFOs into sort of like a 5-lane mod sequencer. Each lane can have a different number of steps, and you can combine pitches from multiple lanes into one value. There's no quantization or scale lock here, so you'll have to make that work out, but certainly an improvement compared to the first version that was released. Finally, in terms of updates since my video, in terms of software, ASM makes a preset manager. They don't unfortunately make a full-blown VST or software controller for Hydrasynth. A third-party company called Sigabort has independently developed and released a beta of a Hydrasynth version of their MIDI synth control software and plugin. They've actually not tried it yet with these two. In some basic testing that I did, it seemed to work fine and stay in sync with Explorer, but I didn't test it thoroughly. And their software currently doesn't work with Deluxe, which makes sense because they'd probably need to update it to handle the two timbres. Whether or not you need the software is up to you. I found that editing patches on Hydrasynth can be just as fast, if not faster in most cases, but the software is a great way to look at the parameters of a patch at once if you want to learn how it's made, especially on Explorer with only 4 parameters visible at a time. And the software also works as a VST if you want to control Hydrasynth within a DAW. It's still considered a beta on their site, so ask for a trial before you buy. Okay, so let's take a look at the pros and cons of Hydrasynth compared to other synths. First and most importantly, and these two are totally subjective, on the pros side, regardless of which Hydra you pick, I think they sound great, and the Hydrasynths are well priced for what they offer, especially Explorer, the desktop, and the original keys. This is obviously more expensive. I got asked to compare Hydrasynth to Novation's Peak, the new Korgs, Modwave, Wavestate, and Op6, Modal, Argon, and Cobalt, and more expensive options like the Waldorf M and Iridium, as well as Super 6. So I'll attempt to do the impossible and compare all those synths in one table with standout Hydrasynth features on the left and things you'll find in one or more other synths, but not on Hydrasynth on the right. So the feature that gets a lot of hype and press is the polyphonic aftertouch or polytouch keyboard, and certainly Hydra is the only synth that has that with the synths that I was asked to compare it to. Now, polyphonic aftertouch is indeed a fun feature to have, but like I mentioned earlier, the physical travel is very short, so it's hard to control precisely. The big question is how much you think you'll use it after the initial excitement fades away. And it's nice that it sort of works in the background and you do need to get used to it. To me, the real unknown is how much the price of a polytouch keybed adds to the price of the synth. Now, I don't know. If, say, it's $50, I'd say it's worth it. If it's more, well, that's up to you. I actually went through all 640 presets on Explorer and all additional about 250 multi-timbral presets on Deluxe, and some of them sound really, really good, but not because of polyphonic aftertouch. So yes, it's nice when it kicks in, and even when it happens naturally as you play, and it does let you vary the sound based on how a preset is programmed, but I would call it the cherry on top of the synth cake and effects icing on the Hydrasynths. Regarding the ribbon, same deal. It's fun, nice to have, and can be inspiring at times, both as pitch bend and in theremin mode, but it's entirely up to you if you believe you'll actually use it, in which case, if you will, it's certainly a pro and fairly unique, except for maybe the Polybrute and, well, maybe the CS80. Anyway, Polytouch is certainly a powerful pro that needs a powerful con. One of the things that most people asked me about was whether the Hydras have a proper polyphonic sequencer, and the answer is no. Synths have knobs to tweak parameters with, and you can't do that if your hands are busy holding keys. Obviously, Hydrasynth has a great and fun arpeggiator, which has a few interesting patterns, but you can't customize them. Now, I already mentioned the LFO sequencer in version 1.5 is really powerful, and you can do a lot of interesting things with it. One thing I think that it's missing is a way to quantize transitions. So I can play it well if I get the timing right, but if not, the sequence doesn't stay in time as I hit new keys. It would be nice if there was an option that would quantize key changes to an LFO. So to me, the LFO sequencers are a pro for the Hydras. Moving on, there's no option to load custom waveforms or wavetables onto the Hydras as opposed to many of the other synths on the list. The wavetables that you can create here in Wavescan mode are limited to 8 waveforms in total. The only other wavetable synth I know with fewer waveforms per table is the Peak with 5. But the fact that you can edit the wavetable here, so go through waves 1 through 8 and independently change them to any waveform you want, lets you edit these waveform journeys and customize them, which is a pretty special thing that you can't find on other wavetable synths. So others will let you edit the wavetables on your computer and support many more wavetables, 64 or 128 or 256, but you'll need to do that on a computer as opposed to editing the different waveforms in a wavetable right here on the synth. Another feature you'll find on some of the synths I was asked to compare this to, not all of them of course, was the ability to load samples or have a database of samples that you can layer alongside the oscillators. So Wavestate and Modwave support that, for example, as well as Iridium, which also supports granular processing, but it's much more expensive than all of these. Anyway, moving on, another pro in our table for the Hydras are the mutants. So first, if you choose an FM mutant, you basically get an additional oscillator. If you go into source and choose either sine or triangle, that's another oscillator for each of the mutants in addition to the 3 oscillators you have per voice. That makes this into a proper multi-operator FM synth, putting Hydrasynth in its own additional category in addition to wavetable synthesis. Beyond that, FM is only one of the different mutant or mutator types. I've not seen a synth with as many wave shapers and as many mutant cross-mod options as Hydrasynth. Now, it doesn't say that there aren't any cool wave shapers on the other synths. Modal synths and Modwave, for example, have quite a few wave shapers and modifiers, but the timbral options hidden within the mutants are pretty insane. There are so many options here. Again, I go through them in the main video. No point in repeating them again here. Next up, filters. Hydrasynth is all digital but has many filter models. It's hard to sum up the competition in one small table. Many of them have digital models. Some have analog filters with fewer models. Analog filters and distortion will end up costing you more on a per voice basis. And obviously not all the competitors are analog. It really depends on how important analog filters are to you. Personally, I think Hydra's digital filters are very good and really just the tip of the timbral iceberg when you consider wave scanning mutants and all the effects. Speaking of which, I think Hydrasynth's effects are great. In particular, the reverb is excellent compared to, say, similarly priced modal synths, but the Peak and Korg synths do give it a run for its money. Hydras do have a freeze reverb, which is a channel favorite, but it doesn't just end with that. Chorus delays and other effects just sound good, but as they do on other synths as well. One advantage that some, but not many of Hydra's competitors have is seamless patch switching, where a sound doesn't get cut off when you change patches. That is unfortunately the case with the basic Hydras. So sounds will get cut off as you change patches. The exception here is Hydrasynth Deluxe, which while it doesn't technically support smooth patch transitions with multis, you can easily play one timbre and then change the keyboard split and play another in parallel, or load up a different single patch into a part while another is playing without the part that you're playing and not swapping, cutting out. Another question I got asked was whether Hydrasynth can pull off binaural patches like the Super 6, and the answer is yes. For the Deluxe, very easily, you can just layer 2 patches and pan one left and the other right. But even with the regular Hydras, you can pan the oscillators hard left and hard right so that any wave shaping can be binaural like it is in Super 6, meaning different per ear. So certainly this applies to mutants when the oscillators are hard panned left and right. But it turns out Hydras actually have 4 filters per voice, not 2, filter 1 and filter 2. There are copies of filter 1 and 2 for the left and right signal path. So you can route any of the oscillators to either one, both left and right pair of filters, and then modulate those filters separately as long as you route the filters in parallel. So here, for example, I've got oscillator 1, hard panned to filter 1. It's also being modulated. Oscillator 2, hard panned to filter 2. which is also being modulated. And if I bring them both up, you've got binaural modulation between the filters, and I've got a macro here for stereo filtering, controlling both filters. So yes, both stereo and binaural filtering and wave shaping is possible on all the Hydrasynths. Moving on, I think Hydrasynth deserves a pro on the interface. This module layout is brilliant, not just because it makes it easy to select a module, but also because it can be used to make mod matrix routings like I showed you earlier. And one of my favorite features is the randomization. So yes, you can randomize the entire preset, but you can also randomize a module just by hitting random and pressing that module, and God knows what's going to happen now. That's oscillator 2. Let's randomize oscillator 1 as well. And another nifty randomization feature, rather than just randomly randomize everything, Shift Random steals ideas from different patches based on the percentage you specify here. And yeah, let's just do that and see what happens. That's actually a pretty good one. So I can keep trying this, rolling the dice. And yeah, the idea is just to have this dialogue. Some other synths have randomization features and some have per module randomization as well. I just found this technique particularly engaging. So that's it for the new Hydras versus each other, versus the other Hydras, and versus the world. I'll be adding a bunch of Hydra-specific ideas and tips to my ever-expanding book, available to the good people who support this channel on Patreon. Hit like if this was useful. Don't forget to ring the notification bell if you want to make sure you don't miss the next one. Thanks for watching.